Welcome back, guys. We are reading Chapter 3 of The Queen's Games by Emily and Smith. So, buckle up, be ready, and let the games begin. Chapter 3. Swords, Bows, and Training. Oh my! The never-ending night had ended with the sun in her eyes before Ember had fallen into a fitful sleep in the luxurious room they were housing her in, though she supposed the only non-luxurious room in the castle was likely the dungeons. Now the rest of the day was beginning 3 hours later when a knock on her door awoke her from her dreamless rest that left her more tired than she had felt before. "Come in," she called as she sat up, clutching the blankets to her chest to cover her underclothes. She hoped the queen herself would not be on the other side to drag her to the next game. She was not well rested enough to actually attend to them yet. She needed another hour of sleep, or maybe even a coffee. To her surprise, Addison was the one to stick her head into her bedchambers. Her eyes widened as she took in Ember's unkempt state and stammered out, "Sorry, I did not mean to wake you. The rest of the girls are up and we were discussing having a quick bite and then going to the training arena to practice." Ember sat there, her lips parted in shock as she stared at the blonde. It was hard to comprehend her invitation. She was being asked to join others in an activity where they would all be forced to interact. "Okay," she said, shaking off her surprise. "That is great. We will meet in 10 minutes. Her door slammed shut, cutting off any reply she could have given. It was odd behavior, but the entirety of her new reality was odd. It felt like someone had knocked her world out of alignment and she was fighting to put it back in place. Maybe some social interaction with the others would bring her back into a less negative outlook. Without any further contemplation, she rose from her bed and swung her feet over the edge. Her mind was racing as she took in the dress that rested at the foot of the bed. A simple red dress. A casual dress like the one she had worn on the days that she would go into the town with her mother to retrieve the groceries. It was easy to slip it over her shoulders and smooth it out, but a glimpse in the mirror to check its fit made her wince. Her hair was a mess. The fights had not been kind. It was thankfully dirt-free from her fiery shield, but it was tangled to such an extent she wondered if she would be able to smooth it again. She had only cut off the ends that were dead, and she did not wish to cut her hair at this point. With careful fingers, she released the knots and smoothed away the flyaway hairs. After too long of a time of staring at her own reflection, her hair was down and no longer resembled a bird's nest. A simple braid down her back was easy enough, even with her tired muscles. With a sigh and a final glance at the purple circles beneath her eyes, she rose to her feet and slipped into a pair of flats next to the door. Ember left the silence of her bedchambers and entered the bustling halls of the palace. Addison took hold of her elbow and guided her to the left of her door. "Here, I grabbed a muffin for you. I hope you like blueberry." "You got my breakfast for me," Ember said as they took a right down a side hall separated from the main path most of the workers were taking. She was not about to question as good of a thing as this. This was a gift from the heavens themselves to her. "The workers were taking away the food from the hall, so I made sure to grab you one. I think if anyone has a chance to show us how to improve for the games, it will be you, Inferno." Addison said it with such conviction that the light finally shone on the situation. Ember was not there to enjoy spending time with her fellow participants. She was there to train them as her family had trained her. This was not a time to get to know one another and bond. This was a time for her to step up and lead them in how to survive the upcoming events they would face. Her features hardened into the same battle-ready face she had held since her arrival, understanding that they were not friends, and they were looking to her as soldiers had looked to her father before. "You do realize Inferno is not my real name?" she asked as the blonde led them through a set of glass doors that led them into a glass-paneled hallway with only one exit at the very end. It was the same tunnel they had taken out of the arena just hours ago. A nap was all that separated her from the battles and training. That and the muffin Addison had saved for her. Was it too much for her to ask for some reprieve from the tortures that she was going to endure the rest of these games? "And you do realize that you are the last of your line, so it may as well be yours. Take it. Wear it with pride." Her tongue was sharp, the words nailing themselves into Ember's heart with the same ferocity as a lioness. The intensity of her usual nature was not there, but it stung the same as any insult that had been hurled at Ember before. "I may be the last of the House of Inferno, but that does not mean that there will not be another one day," she said, avoiding Addison's sideways glance. She would never dare to let the woman see her pain. Emotional or physical, no one needed to understand her suffering. She was strong enough to keep her shoulders squared and her face neutral. Tears could stay hidden until nightfall when she would be alone. Keep believing that. We all know how powers ascend. An inferno of noble status has never ascended on someone who is not of the paternal noble line. Addison said it was like she had no idea of how much she could hurt Ember. She had stabbed her with a nail, but now she had dug a knife into her and twisted the blade. Then history will be made. I refuse to be the last of my house. Ember had always known that she was the last of her line. Her parents were unable to have any more children. There were no other children of the noble line of Inferno. She would be the last of her house unless the stars chose a different fate. But to her, it seemed clear. I apologize. I did not mean to hurt your feelings, Addison said, ripping her from her thoughts. It was such a sudden change of conversation that it sent Ember reeling. What? Ember stuttered out. I was only attempting to justify my calling you by the name Inferno. I did not mean to imply that as being an insult. It seemed that Addison was full of surprises. Her words were as sincere as her silver gaze. It spoke volumes to her character. I forgive you. Thank you for apologizing. Ember took the apology to heart. Never before had someone apologized to her for words that had caused her pain, and she was not about to look a gift horse in the mouth. Perchance she had the wrong impression of Addison. This was not the same girl she had seen so many years ago. This was a mature woman who was able to admit her wrongs. Of course, now eat up. It is going to be a long morning if we do not get a move on, Addison said, taking Ember's wrist and pushing it up so that the muffin was closer to her mouth and no longer forgotten in her fingers. Is it still morning? She wondered as she peeled away the wrapper and watched the crumbs fall to the earth and be trampled underfoot. She had no plans to follow the same path. No matter the Queen's games and her wickedness herself, Ember had a plan, and it was to prevail no matter the cost. Only for a little longer, hence why I was able to secure that muffin for you, Addison said pointedly as she stared at her, waiting for Ember to eat. Got it. Message received, she said, lifting the muffin to her lips and working on finishing it off before they passed through the threshold into the arena. Entering the columned open-air battlegrounds caused the hair on the back of her neck to raise. She sucked in a shuddering breath and shook off the feeling of anxiety that attempted to grip her. She would not let memories alone throw her into panic. The feelings of her flames burning hot against her own skin as she forced them to maintain a shield against Prince Kane's pummeling force of the ocean spray was something that would not leave her anytime soon, but she would not let it affect her in a negative way. She had wondered at the time if her own skin would lose its ability to walk among flames without burning, if it would just sear off from the power pouring out of her. It was unheard of for one to lose their powers, but she had never pushed herself as hard to maintain a shield for that length of time. She had never fought against such a worthy opponent as the prince. You feel it? Addison asked. Feel what? She said, scanning the arena for an invisible enemy, but even Claudia was standing fully visible at the moment. The air. It's filled with anxiety. Addison was looking out at the others who were standing close together, speaking in hushed tones. However, Maria was on the ground, clutching her sides and rolling with laughter while Claudia hid her face in her hands. You are an empath? Ember asked as she realized the power the blonde held. She was unable to keep the shock out of her tone. Empaths were rare. Only 1 out of every 1,000 members of the House of Charms was able to read emotions, and most were only able to read strong emotional spikes. Oh, no, I am an empath, but I am not nearly as talented as my father, Addison said, rubbing the back of her neck with her hand. She kept her sights locked on the others, but that did not stop Ember from catching the heat radiating off her cheeks. It was stronger than usual. Clearly, her words had sparked embarrassment in Addison. Osiris is a talented empath. He was the one who told my father to stop training me so hard. Something about emotionally stunting me, Ember said before taking a bite of her breakfast. Never had she had a muffin that was both sweet and tart, but she was impressed with the culinary prowess of whoever had baked it. You know my father? Addison's question caused Ember to look up and shrug. Only in passing. He thought I was a commoner until he saw me juggle coals in the square to stop a small girl from crying. Ember had found the girl near the fountain, sobbing so hard that she could not even tell Ember what was wrong. Scraping a few coals from a nearby cooking pit, Ember had flung them into the air, catching and releasing them in a circular pattern that had brought a crowd, and eventually the girl's mother had retrieved her and thanked Ember for her help. Osiris, Addison's father, had been the one to find the woman and direct her to where Ember was. She had been praised for that man's work. I forget, we lived in the same village. I've not seen you in the past 5 or so years, Addison frowned, obviously remembering the days like they were yesterday. It has been 10 years since you last told me how meaningless I was for belonging to the House of Inferno, Ember said, remembering those days just as sharply as the crying child. Addison had taken her anger out on Ember for many of their childhood days, cursing her for having been revoked, the words a child could only learn from a parent. Those days were so foreign compared to their conversation now. I wish I could tell my old self what I know now. I would have never been so cruel, Addison said, folding her body in on itself. Ember shook her head, not understanding what the woman meant. I do believe you were just as cruel yesterday, if I am not mistaken, Ember said, unable to keep her tone in check. Addison did not even flinch. Instead, she met Ember's gaze and grinned when she saw flames in her eyes. Would you believe me if I told you it was an act to save face with the men? Another surprise from Addison made Ember wonder how many tricks that woman had up her dress sleeve. Perchance she would have survived a battle in the arena last night with all the tricks she was able to pull. Why in the stars would you think that would help you save face? Ember said as they were approached by the others. Because, Ember, my greatest power is manipulation. Empath or not, I am a master manipulator, and not every man wants that. The soldiers even gave me a sword when I asked for a bow. I was trying to prove my worth at taking a stand for myself and my beliefs, but the queen knocked me down a few pegs. So since my original plan did not work, I need you to help me become able to wield a sword, since there is no bloody bow in this forsaken palace. Addison said, planting herself in Ember's path, stopping her in her tracks lest she run the blonde over. You want to wield a sword? Ember asked, looking into the gray eyes of the woman she had thought would be her enemy in these games. However, never in history had enemies requested each other's help in order to win a war. This threw her view on the world into a different perception. They were not enemies, nor friends. They were comrades. They were each other's competition, but also their best bet at survival. I swear, is that all you got out of my speech? Addison said, slapping her palm to her forehead. I forgive you for trying to save face by smearing mine. I suppose if we are truly training, though, I need to find a sword that is not covered in flames and has a dull edge, Ember said, casting a glance to find where the training materials were kept. Why? Because I do not wish to burn or behead you, Lady Addison. Kylie answered the problem quickly by handing a dull steel sword to Ember. No killing, maiming, or blood. Got it? The healers will not be pleased if they have to tend to us outside of the games. Understood, Ember laughed as the woman slung a bamboo training pole across her shoulders. Those were typically used for sword training when you were brand new at wielding a sword. She had not seen one in years. I can help these two with their powers. You just focus on charms over there. Kylie smirked. It was almost like she knew the history between Addison and Ember. It was knowingly putting them into a position where they would have to work together. It was underhanded, but Ember could appreciate it nonetheless. I think I can manage. Addison was going to force Ember to eat her words. Addison dropped the sword on her foot at least twice every 10 minutes, and if it was not the sword, she would step on Ember's foot with her own. She kept trying to hold the sword completely upright, opening herself up to be attacked from a direct frontal attack. For every mistake that Ember corrected, 6 more would rise up to take its place. Oh my stars, please stop stepping on my foot. You do not have to take a step forward when you are in the space of your opponent. You pivot or step away, Ember said, holding her face between her hands to hide her anger. She would not make the same mistakes as her father. She would not scream at this woman and break her spirit. Addison wanted to learn, and Ember would not allow herself to sway her from that. I am so sorry, Ember. You must have told me 1,000 times, Addison said, crashing to her knees and once more landing on Ember's foot. It barely even hurt, but Addison flung herself away, afraid she would burst into flames if she stayed in place. Let us just try this once more. This time, pretend I am Austin or someone you do not want to be near, Ember said, taking up their position once again. Addison carefully took her stance, this time raising her sword properly so that it was at an angle and would be easier to move to parry an attack. Ember took a step forward and Addison lunged. She performed the basic maneuvers Ember had taught her with more speed than before. She was gaining confidence in her movements. These were nothing special, but they would keep her alive against a skilled fighter. This time, instead of stepping back, she flung herself beneath Ember's blade and rolled back to her feet at Ember's backside. It was not something she had anticipated, something she had not even taught the blonde. Before she could pivot and block the oncoming attack, Addison dropped the sword and tackled Ember to the ground. "Oh my stars, did you see me? I actually got inside your defense and bested you!" "You were playing me a fool?" Ember spluttered, spitting out the dirt that had gotten inside her mouth at the impact. She was having a hard time believing that this woman could not sword fight, but got the drop on her with a move she had not been taught. "Oh, no, but you told me to step back or pivot, so I did something that was not stepping forward. That way I would not step on you again. It is what I would do if I was using my bow against a sword," Addison said, stepping to her feet and helping Ember up as well. Her enthusiasm was impressive, considering how tired Ember felt. "You still managed to drop your sword, though. Would you really drop your bow in hand-to-hand combat?" Ember said as she brushed the dirt from her skirts. There was a slight tear in the fabric, but nothing severe enough that she would need to change. If it got any worse, the tear was below her knees, and she would most likely just cut off the end to stay on the arena floor. Addison still required her help, and she was not going to let a clothing malfunction stop her from helping. "Never, but I cannot hold the sword with my forearm. Besides, it is at least thrice as heavy as a bow. My wrist gets tired from holding it," Addison complained, making a show of rubbing her wrist. Ember closed her eyes and said a prayer, hoping for the strength and patience needed to help the woman in front of her. Maybe she could use the clothing malfunction for a moment to think. "If I had fought you in a war, I would have assumed you to be skilled in swordsmanship and not have underestimated you. By dropping your sword, that would be your only defense out the window, and you would be dead where you stood. If a gladius is too heavy, then we should look into a short sword," Ember said, rubbing the bridge of her nose with her thumb and forefinger. If the weight was the only problem, that would be a simple solution. But she knew the problem ran deeper than that. Addison was skilled in a bow and was reluctant to forget that training to pick up a new weapon. "Oh," Addison said, scooping her sword off the ground and bowing her head. "I did not realize. Understand this, your opponent is never going to be a teacher. You can always learn from a battle, but always follow the assumption that your opponent's goal is to end your life. If you always fight for your life, that sword might feel a little bit lighter," Ember said, reaching out and patting the blonde's shoulder. "I hope that I can get my bow back once we leave the games, but I understand that I need to learn to use this sword," Addison said under her breath, her eyes turned towards the sky, watching the sun's descent in there. It had been hours of hard work under the sun, with a small crowd that had passed through occasionally to watch the practice, but no one had stuck around for long. The red on Addison's exposed arms was expanding across her skin, a burn from the sun's glare. Ember let her fingers linger on the girl's pierced skin and drew the heat from the mark, letting it fade into nothing. She had suffered enough sunburns to know that they were not kind. "If not, I will help you learn how to use that sword properly. Next time you go out in the sun, do not forget to use a blocking salve. You are not used to its effects," Ember said, releasing the girl and making her way back to her fighting stance. "Now again!" The sun was resting on the horizon when a horn blared in the distance, causing all of the women to stop in their tracks, staring at a guard in shock. "The Queen requests your attendance at a meal before the games this evening. Follow me."